Welcome everyone to our June meetup for Data in the Greater Good. Wonderful to see all of you here this evening. I'm Elaine Gamble, Community Leader of Data in the Greater Good, where our focus is the use of data in mission-driven organizations, data, analytics, digital transformation, among other areas. And organizations talk to Data in the Greater Good, our community of over 2,000 people, about how they're using data in innovative ways to bring more value to their audiences. And I am joined by my colleague, Bill Prickett, who is leading the recording of tonight's session, and also joined by my colleague, Maura Fields, who leads social media for Data in the Greater Good. Welcome to all of you. We are honored to have back with us tonight Charity Navigator, and the topic is assessing nonprofit impact. We were really honored to have them with us last year. We were really in the thick of the pandemic to talk to us about giving during the pandemic. And as we emerge from it, now they will talk to us more about how they help to guide giving and partner with donors. Every year, millions of donors visit Charity Navigator to help guide their giving donors a more comprehensive overview of nonprofit effectiveness. Charity Navigator has really executed a game changer in terms of informing donors. They now score nonprofits on how much good they achieve per dollar of cost. Tonight, we will learn how Charity Navigator is using research-based mathematical models to estimate impact, and how they plan to scale the depth and breadth of their impact and results beacon. With us tonight are two subject matter experts in this area from Charity Navigator. Stephen Rockwell leads the evolution of Charity Navigator's rating system as an experienced executive with a track record of success creating innovative, technology-driven solutions to solve the most pressing world issues. His expertise includes raising philanthropic investment to drive impact, building cohesive and high-performing teams within organizations and across networks. He had a very distinguished career. Prior to joining Charity Navigator, he served in a variety of strategic, innovation, and technical leadership roles throughout the nonprofit sector, most recently as the American Friends Service Committee's Chief Information and Technology Officer. He holds an MPA from Harvard's Kennedy School and an MBA from the Sloan School of Management at MIT, and a bachelor's in policy analysis and management from Cornell. With us is also Tamsin Chen from Charity Navigator. Tamsin manages Charity Navigator's efforts to incorporate social impact in its charity ratings and increase the amount of high quality impact information in the sector. She previously oversaw research and ratings at Impact Matters, a nonprofit rating agency that Charity Navigator acquired in 2020. Prior to Impact Matters, Tamsin worked as an international development, managing field projects, and conducting monitoring and evaluation for nonprofits in rural Haiti. She holds a degree in economics and international studies from Vassar College. Outside the office, she dabbles in music, dance, and painting. Welcome to Stephen and Tamsin. Before we go into their talks, if you have questions, you should type them into the chat box. And when we get to Q&A, I will call on you to share your question, or I'm happy to share it for you. Tamsin and Stephen will speak for approximately 30 minutes before our Q&A session. On that note, I will turn it over to our speakers. Welcome to Data and the Greater Good.
Fantastic. After a year and a half of nothing but Zoom meetings, I may have figured out how to do it. So fair enough. Well, thank you. And thanks for that introduction. It was kind. Tamsin and I were just joking that Vassar and Cornell have seen the butt of many Simpsons jokes. So it's funny to hear just a day later we were talking about that. In any case, I'm really happy to be here and talk about this this topic. And and really maybe even a shift from the last time we were here. I think Kevin Scally, I think who's with us tonight, may chime in if we get anything wrong. And Matt Dragon, our director of engineering, were here last time, and we were just about ready to launch Encompass. And so we're going to go through some of that in the early going tonight, just to sort of lay the groundwork. And then we're going to talk about this exciting development of a nonprofit acquiring another nonprofit and a mission meld that has occurred. And then Tamsin's going to get in really deep on what we do. And I think that's probably why probably the bulk of the content and why people are here. So let me just say, like, a lot of folks are familiar with Charity Navigator and our star rating system. That's what we've been doing for the last 20 years. And we've been focusing on finance, and then we added accountability and transparency metrics to that star rating. And what we heard from donors, and if you think about your own philanthropic giving, is that for many folks, I want to know that the organization is sustainable, but I really want to make a difference with my gift. And that means that the organization's making an impact towards its mission, right? The programs are doing what they say they're supposed to do, and they're delivering on mission, right? And that's really what we're seeing in terms of donor preference. And if you, again, think about your own preferences, that's really what you want to see. And, it's sort of a hard look in the mirror, like, for Charity Navigator, does our rating system actually do that? Are the financial metrics a proxy for impact? No, they're not. They really are not. They do say something meaningful about the organization, but that's what got us down the road of thinking about a more all-encompassing, right, system, and that's where we come up with the Encompass rating system. And I'll talk to a little bit of the overall system, in order to ground what Tamsin presents within this impact and results. To note a couple of things. We decided to go to a 100-point scale instead of the 4-star system. Kevin and I tested the hell out of this thing with lots of different users, nonprofits, donors, and because it is a big shift for us. So we really needed the user data to back this up. And when you started putting stars next to numbers on a 100-point scale, the 100-point scale outperformed stars on everything. Essentially anything we wanted to look at in terms of user behavior, the numerical system, and it makes sense, right? We were all graded on 100-point scales. We know what those mean. By the way, we talked to Steve Goodall, who was the CEO of JD Power. He's one of the expert interviewers, and he said, this is also international, that, like, it's internationally true that the 100-point scale is relevant for people. And we decided to, the couple things underneath of this in terms of what we were trying to do. We wanted to get to scale, and that may be what we talked about last year, was the star system only rates 9,000. There are some barriers to entry. We know that there's 1.6 million, 1.7 million nonprofits. There's probably 400,000 or so that are in the rateable universe for us when you start taking out the churches and things like that. We're doing a real disservice to donors and to nonprofits by not providing a trust indicator to a much larger group, especially those smaller community-based organizations where we were not doing any sort of evaluation. So we got to scale last summer by launching the Encompass rating system with a finance and accountability set of measures. We call these 4 measures, or these 4 graphics that you're looking at, beacons. So it's a 4-beacon system. Each one of these beacons is on a 100-point scale. and they are weighted differently to achieve the overall score of Encompass. And this will become clearer when we look at a quick look at the profile page. So we launched with finance and accountability. We're going to tell you about the impact and results story in a second. And we also have these other two domains. We're calling culture and community, which involves lots of things like constituent voice, DEI, reputational measures, other pieces there. And this summer, and we launched that beacon in March. And then this summer, we're going to launch the leadership and adaptability beacon. So in a year, we've launched something in each of these domains. And the notion is that we're building this system in an iterative way, almost like software development, where we put something out as like a minimally viable product, learn, listen to donors, listen to nonprofits, and then take the next step. And so this is an evolving rating system, heavily grounded in expertise and heavily grounded in listening to those who are going to use the system most. So it's just a lay of the land in terms of how we're thinking about the rating system, and it lives on a profile page. We've also redone all the profile pages. Again, these also continue to evolve, but here's where you can see the overall score in this right side dashboard with this tagline: give with confidence. Anything over a 75, we're saying give confidently, and providing that trust indicator, and establishing that link between the donor and the nonprofit. And that's why, almost 10 million users come to the site every year for us, is that they're really looking, to validate often a decision. And sometimes they're looking to do some discovery within a cause area. And they're looking to donate to a well-rated organization. You can see here how the beacons live on the page. You can then click into these and get more details, and it takes you down the page. So this is how it's displayed on a page. So we're going to talk about impact matters and the impact and results beacon. It just so happened, and we've been talking to Impact Matters for a long time. Tamsin can tell you the more complete story. But, an organization that had been around for 5 or 6 years, did a successful launch of their own in the fall of 2019, had a New York Times article, a lot of attention given to Impact Matters, and really spent a lot of time in R&D in learning how to do an impact analysis well and at some scale. Those to me are like the two, is it meaningful information? And can you do it at some scale are important drivers. And we announced an acquisition in October. When we announced the acquisition, we lit up that impact and results beacon over here with the data and the methodology backing that data from Impact Matters. So from the beginning, that beacon has been driven by this Impact Matters methodology. And so it was very fortuitous timing, because we're building this system, and there was interest on both sides to make that happen. So that's just some background, and sort of where impact lives. I would also just say, quite generally, before I hand it over to Tamsin, that that acquisition has really helped hone our thinking about what does it mean when we're providing a rating to a nonprofit. What are we actually saying? And over the last 3 or 4 months, even, we've gotten a lot clearer about that. And just to note what we think that overall rating is, what we're trying to convey with the Encompass rating system is that this organization is impactful, that we're talking both about direct impacts, and Tamsin's going to go into that, the direct program impacts that the organization makes towards its mission, and indirect impacts or community benefits that that organization creates in other domains that we think are important or we think the donors should know about. So for example, some of the DEI measures might live there in that domain. They might also live in operational pieces. So that's what we're saying. We include things like financial metrics and organizational effective metrics and capacity metrics to the degree that they create the enabling environment for sustained achievement of that impact, right? So we're not just looking at a liabilities asset ratio because we think an organization needs to have a healthy LTA to be well managed. What we're saying is that healthy LTA ratio, liabilities asset ratio, means that organization, we think it's one indicator that they will be sustaining their impact into the future. And we've gotten a lot of clarity about that, and we've got to work on how we message that over the next few months. But I just want to note that like the overall message of the rating system is direct and indirect impact. And then the impact and results beacon in this system is what's clearly communicating and evaluating the direct program impact that organization's making through its work. And with that, I will hand it over to Tamsin to say more about what we mean by impact within that realm.
Thanks, Stephen. So what do we mean by impact? Direct impact. Impact is the mission relevant change caused by a nonprofit. And I think it is really worth pausing and looking specifically at the words that we're very intentionally choosing to use here in this definition to just take us back to fundamentals. So first, mission relevant. So why mission relevant? Nonprofit organizations, by contrast to any other type of organization, exist to fulfill a mission. And next slide. Here are just a few examples of some mission statements. It could be to reduce pet homelessness, street homelessness, to eliminate avoidable blindness, to end extreme poverty in rural Africa. Whatever the mission is the nonprofit's reason for existing. And so, in our minds, a given nonprofit's impact is defined, therefore, in relation to its specific mission. So sometimes when I think about the word impact, it's such a large concept. It really helps to focus by replacing it with the word mission impact instead. And so second, going back to the previous slide, want to reflect for a second on caused by, or the change caused by a nonprofit, because here's often where people can get tripped up. I like to think back to middle school science class and learning for the first time about the scientific method. How do we conduct an experiment? We have a hypothesis and we apply a treatment, a test condition to one group of subjects. And then we find an identical group of subjects and we don't apply the treatment to them, right? And we treat them as the experimental control. And because the test subjects are in all other ways identical, except for one is receiving the treatment and one isn't, we can say that the difference that we observe between the two groups is caused by treatment. And that's all that causal analysis is. And so, of course, the scientific method has long existed in natural sciences and social sciences, but where does the nonprofit sector stand as far as employing the scientific method to understand the impact of nonprofits on their missions? Well, we're really sadly far behind. I won't go into the many and varied reasons why, but on the next slide, I do want to focus on, and the next one after that, the consequence of not having causal analysis. What's at stake is that we don't have this information illuminated for us. Here are two real nonprofits that we've looked at. One is clearly much more effective than the other at reducing cases of child malnutrition. And, AfriCare on the left might be much more effective for any number of reasons. It could be they're correctly identifying the children who need intervention. They're using evidence-based interventions that have high success rates, high community acceptance rates, and so forth. But the consequence is that without this information illuminated for us, we have over $300 billion in individual giving a year that's not being guided by this information on impact. And that's a lot at stake. I do want to note that we're not calling out Charity B by name here. Often it's not because they're intentionally keeping donors in the dark about their impact, but in fact that everyone is in the dark. The staff, the leaders at that nonprofit, the beneficiaries of that nonprofit, us as donors and independent evaluators are in the dark about the impact of many, many nonprofits. So what can we do about this? First, no one organization like Charity Navigator is going to solve this sector-wide issue, but it's going to be a group issue for sure. But we do think we have a role to play as a charity rater, and that's to start rating on impact. I'll take you quite quickly through the 3 principles of impact analysis that we adhere to. 1, we focus on real outcomes. 2, we estimate causal change in outcomes, and 3, we assess cost effectiveness. So outcomes, I'm sure several of you have heard about logic models and the vocabulary of outputs and outcomes and so forth. For us, outcomes are the meaningful changes in the lives of the beneficiaries that nonprofits serve. Think higher educational attainment, fewer maternal deaths, more people with clean water, lower carbon emissions, and so forth. Often the other statistics that we hear thrown around, like the number of people served or number of volunteer hours provided, those can be interesting operational statistics, descriptive statistics, and so forth, but not what we say would constitute outcomes. So that's 1. 2, causal change just goes back to this idea of ensuring that we are taking account of the counterfactual. So what would have happened to beneficiaries if, counter to fact, the nonprofit hadn't served them? And that's going back to our middle school scientific method. And 3rd, cost effectiveness. Why cost effectiveness? This really boils down to the fact that we have limited resources in the social sector and unlimited need. And if we look at nonprofit A, nonprofit B, who are identical in all respects, even in the quality of their services, and they're both able to avert a case of childhood malnutrition, but one does so for 10x the cost of the other. All else equal, I think we can many of us can agree that it's the best use of resources to choose based on cost effectiveness in this case. All right, next slide. So I do want to share the scope of our current impact analysis and give a little sort of foreshadowing about future. At the moment, we focus only on direct service nonprofits. And so, some of the examples I've given before, we're talking about, groups that work directly with beneficiaries to improve their outcomes, rather than groups that work perhaps a little further upstream. They're in research or they're in policy advocacy that might have a longer theory of change, so to speak. Our expertise at the moment and our cost effectiveness analysis approach applies best to direct service nonprofits. And we want to get that right before we start to broaden our analysis to other types of nonprofits. And of course, in the meantime, the lack of an impact and results score for an advocacy nonprofit, say, through no fault of their own, is not doesn't have negative consequences on their overall rating. So that's our focus on direct service. Second, the richness of our impact analysis will grow, we hope, with the richness of data in the nonprofit sector overall. So for today, whereas today we can talk about a nonprofit's cost to provide a meal to someone who is in need, perhaps tomorrow, or the figurative tomorrow, we can talk about the cost for a nonprofit to provide a nutritious meal or a quality meal to a person in need. All right, I think we can skip to the next slide. So, great. Here's an example for a real nonprofit, Sight Savers, that provides cataract surgery to low-income populations in remote areas, typically in developing countries. I just want to bring this up because this is really the extent of the math that is used in these calculations. It is arithmetic that many people, certainly the data scientists in this room, will be able to follow along. We have, variable T, we're looking at total cost of that program, all divided by A times B minus C, where A is the number of cataract surgeries performed by the nonprofit, and that's a figure that they would have to provide, times B, the efficacy rate of cataract surgery, and that's a figure that we can derive from the scientific literature, minus C, the counterfactual number of successful vision recoveries without Sight Savers. It happens to be, for this methodology, also a figure that we drew from the scientific literature. And while this is a little bit of a simplification, it's not too far from the reality of what goes on, day to day at Charity Navigator when we are estimating the impact of nonprofits. Next. All right. So the question then is, okay, we figured out that Sight Savers averts a case of blindness for, I think it was $50. Is that good? What rating do we give based on that estimate? How good is good? It happens that the blindness case is a little bit complicated to explain. In a nutshell, we use the global burden of diseases disability weights to turn it into disability adjusted life years, compare it to WHO protocols. It's a little more complicated than I can explain today, but a simpler example is this one with two nonprofits. They are real, but I anonymized, that provide clean water, or in fact, they provide water purifiers that then provide clean water. And why did one get 94 out of 100, or rather 100 out of 100 on impact and results, if you look closely, and 50 out of 100 for the other? That's based on their cost effectiveness. And we benchmarked them against the market cost to obtain clean water in their regions. Both were based in Asia. The price to beat was $11.43. And so you can see that A beats that by a lot, and B doesn't, hence our scores. Okay, how we work. So this is an overview of the historical process that has resulted in the existing approximately 1,000 impact and results scores that currently live on charitynavigator.org. And I emphasize that it's historical because we are not only iterating on our analysis methodology, but also on our operational model in order to scale. So to date, what we've done is we've created a methodology based on or one program type at a time. So for cataract surgeries, there is one equation. For water purification nonprofits, there is a separate equation. And then for all nonprofits that are in that group that share that common program type, we then have searched their publicly available materials, their Form 990s, their annual reports, their websites, and so forth, to glean the usually a handful of data points that we need to calculate impact. And so that's historically what we've done. Going forward, which might be on the next slide, future plans, we want to experiment with decentralizing this data collection process, and essentially, instead of us scraping publicly available information, can we open up the process to nonprofits themselves, and can we launch a nonprofit portal where they can submit their data according to our data prompts, And, can we also look to other data partners in the space? There are many sort of infrastructure sectoral organizations that have access to impact information on nonprofits. And in that way, can we reduce the burden on nonprofits themselves, increase our efficiency, win-win-win. So those are some avenues that we're exploring from the operational side. Methodologically, there remain plenty of avenues to explore as well, not least of which is moving beyond cost effectiveness analysis of direct service nonprofits and starting to explore how does this look like when a nonprofit is seeking to change, public opinion, is seeking to influence policy making. How do we draw the lines of causality there, and so forth.
Well, thank you very much, Tamsin and Stephen. Very engaging talk. You're really taking philanthropy and accountability in a whole new exciting direction. So really appreciate this very informative talk. So first question I have for you. In your algorithm, do you reflect the fact that a nonprofit can be very efficient with what they're bringing and returning to a community, but not efficient in their internal operations? Therefore, their success could be short-lived or not sustainable. How would your model capture scenarios like that?
That's a great question. So in some ways, that's why we have some of the other beacons in the system, right? So our finance metrics should pick up on it and get some signal from us on from the organization about their ongoing sort of capacity, their capacity to be sustained into the future. So that's where at least part of that is, but there's lots of other elements to capacity other than just finances. And so is the organization adaptable? Can it articulate a set of strategic goals? That there are certain sort of leadership and strategy and adaptability parts to capacity that are really essential to what you're saying, right? And so we're also trying to pick up on that. The first metric in the culture and community beacon is on constituent feedback. Does the organization listen to the people it serves? There's really good research from our partner feedback labs and others, that says that, to the degree that organizations are doing that well, they tend to be higher impact organizations. They also tend to be organizations that are taking diversity, equity, inclusion matters much more seriously. And so we included that as a potential metric. Now, we're not doing anything quality with that yet. We're just saying, do you do it? But you can imagine a world where the signal on that question would probably best come from the people that are being served, right? And so letting donors know that this organization does not have a good reputation with the people it's serving, or it's gone down over the last couple of years, would be interesting signals about the long-term sustainability, and frankly, maybe even the quality of the program that's being run, right? That it's actually a quality metric. And if you see a drop in quality, chances are that there's a source of concern. So, we've got these other components to the system, that should help us get some signal on that, and give that to donors. It's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. In some respects, do you believe your modeling favors a larger nonprofit and one that may have a more affluent donor base versus a smaller, more community-based nonprofit?
I'm going to give Tamsin the first shot on that, on impact, but I have some thoughts maybe after she goes.
I actually don't think so when it comes to the pure numbers. we've seen some of the most impactful nonprofits defined as, cost to achieve their particular outcome, or to cause their particular outcome according to their mission. We've seen some of the most successful ones be the very small ones. And this varies by program type, it varies by geography. I don't see I'm not seeing in the data a clear pattern that favors the larger nonprofits. That said, does data collection perhaps pose a barrier to entry to getting an impact and results score? And are larger organizations better sort of capacitated to provide the data that's needed? Potentially, yes. And it's definitely a concern that's on our minds. And so in the last few weeks and in the weeks going forward, we'll want to continue beta testing with nonprofits, inviting them to our calls to understand, is this data point something that is accessible for you to provide, and work toward that, try to meet nonprofits where they're at, with the quality of our own ratings in mind as well. There's always a bit of a balance there. And so there may be a group of nonprofits for whom an impact and results score is going to be aspirational for a while, but we hope the existence of the impact and results score and by making our methodology transparent to them, the data points that we are asking for, making that transparent to them, they can carve out a roadmap for themselves to be on a journey toward getting an impact and results score.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just contribute or add to what because Tamsin, that's an excellent answer. Tamsin and I were just asked this question by a potential funder today. So,
Okay.
So it's a very timely question. A lot of people are thinking about it. Just to add a little bit, in some cases, we're going to be potentially going to be the way the organization reports its impact. For the lower capacity organization that doesn't have a program monitoring and evaluation office and things like that. And I think Tamsin was alluding to this. It might be a journey. So if you come into contact with the tool and you're a food pantry and you're not counting the number of meals you served, you might start counting them, right? So, so we're improving together the quality of the data, or just the fact that there is data together. And I think there's actually benefits to the nonprofit as they start to engage in that practice and leverage the impact analysis tools that we're providing, and just sort of the structure. And that's the other thing I would say. We're walking through, the portal that Tamsin's making reference to walks that staff person at a nonprofit through multiple steps, and we're providing helpers as we go. And if you get stuck in the process, we're going to try and provide the types of resources. Are you stuck? Here are some tools to help you, measure this kind of work, right? So we're not going to leave organizations hanging. We really want to be in a place where we can provide, at least that basic level of support so that they can upskill and get themselves sort of in position to do some of that basic reporting. And the other thing I'd say, it's an educational process too, for, donors want to see it, so if you want to take the next step in your fundraising, you have to start being able to report on the impact of your work. And so we're hopefully providing a fairly quick and easy to use tool to help you do that.
Do you feel you are somewhat reliant or over-reliant on regression-based models, which may not give people enough consideration for what their potential is and what they could achieve in the future, new leadership, et cetera? They had a bad year.
That's interesting. The impact and results calculations are based on historical data. So we'll look at, not your future budget, but your expenses expended, and the outputs or outcomes that you have counted up, from the past, recent year, and use those as a predictor in some ways of what's possible for that organization. But as you say, as the organization expands its capacity, it improves its leadership, the scope of its impact may grow. And the impact and results beacon at this time does not take care of that. But with the overall Encompass rating being what it is, impact results is just one of the ingredients there. And our hope is that the other beacons can capture a lot of these other dimensions and give context to the historical impact figures that we're seeing. Oh, sorry.
You're on mute. How many of us have heard that? How many times have we all heard that over the past year? So as you look ahead and as we come out of the pandemic, as you know, a number of not-for-profits really struggled during that period, some less so. But overall, it did impact a number of organizations. So how in your modeling do you factor in what might have been just a temporary setback as we emerge out of the pandemic? Or at the same time, for some, it could have had a permanent impact on their operations, even looking ahead. How would you solve for that? What kind of judgment would you use to differentiate between who is impacted on a short-term basis and will bounce back versus those who will probably have a sustained longer-term impact from the pandemic?
Yeah, we had a webinar earlier today launching our portal for nonprofits, and this was top of mind for a lot of organizations, obviously. And one thing to say though is that there's actually a real distribution. And one of the questions we got was, what if we did well in the pandemic? Like in terms of our outcomes and our financial metrics, what if we did well? Do we need to go through what you're asking us to go through, which I'll talk to in a second? The answer was, well, no. So our commitment from the beginning has been, we will not adversely affect a nonprofit organization ratings wise because they were affected by the pandemic or they were doing the right things. So our STAR system, for example, looks at working capital. If you spent your working capital down to make ends meet because fundraising had fallen off in the pandemic, well, that's why you have that. That's why you have reserves. And so if you made those kind of choices, we don't want to penalize you for doing so. And so that's, in some ways, we're handling it, as we go. But for this year, we're asking organizations to share their story about what happened. And as long as they share their story, we're not going to downgrade their rating as a result of anything that happened in the pandemic. Your question about longer term ramifications, I think, poses a bigger problem that we haven't figured out yet. Is there, for example, by sector, are we seeing, I'm just making this up, but are we seeing arts organizations who had to completely shut down having a much tougher time getting back on their feet than maybe social service agencies that could keep the doors open in some ways, right? And so we don't know that yet. We'll be responsive to what the data shows us. And if we've got to do another year or more than that, or do a subsector correction, then I think that's worth us taking a look at.
Absolutely. Did you want to add to that, Tamsin?
I did. I just wanted to chime in as it relates to the impact and results beacon specifically. A nonprofit's cost effectiveness estimate is what it is, and if it now costs twice as much to effect an outcome, it costs twice as much to effect an outcome. But the benchmarks also really matter here. The benchmarks being the yardsticks against which we hold each nonprofit's cost effectiveness estimate, and those we adjust, according to the situation, the broader external situation that we're seeing. And so those can accommodate sort of many manners of sort of external economic shock.
And final question, do you work to mentor organizations who may struggle to get the premier, the standard Charity Navigator rating? They're not able to achieve that. And do you have initiatives where you help to mentor and partner an organization that may not meet your standard, but may have good potential?
We have some intentions on that front. It's been, it's a little bit of a journey for us as an independent evaluator, and just sort of thinking, how far down that road do we go while still maintaining the role of an independent evaluator? And so there is that tension, frankly, even internally, about how far down that road we go. I'm definitely more of a proponent that we're not just providing a rating and then peace outing people. We actually want to be engaged and supportive, and find ways. Like, we're a small but mighty team. We've got like 27 or 28 people on staff. Like, we're not going to be helping the entire nonprofit sector through, but we can create some programming. With partners, we can point people to the tools and resources where folks can get help. And that's really, in some ways, the commitment that we have. We are toying with and actually doing some concept development around, for really community-based organizations, are there some targeted things that we could be doing? And so that's definitely in play for us. And so up until a year ago, we didn't evaluate organizations with less than $1 million in operating budget. Now that we are doing this at a scale of tens of thousands of organizations, we've got a lot to do. I mean, the other thing I would say is, we've got a lot of work to do just to get the organizations to know they have a rating, and then to get them to know, for most of them, it's going to be good. And so how do you, if you haven't had this experience before, how do you now leverage this rating to do a better job in your fundraising? How do you take advantage of it? And so Kevin and his team, are doing a lot of great work to help the organization sort of take their score and be out and proud about it, and using it to raise more dollars for their mission. And so there's a lot more work to do on that front. And it's just, and it's a great question. I mean, it's something we're grappling with almost every day at this point.
Great. Well, we will end on that note. And again, we want to thank Tamsin and Stephen for a very, very informative and engaging talk from Charity Navigator and their rating methodologies. And we invite all of you back next month, where Citizens Committee for Children will be speaking with us. They are the leading child advocacy organization in New York, and they will be talking about child well-being, anti-poverty, anti-homelessness programs, even more critical need for a number of their areas during the pandemic and as we emerge from it. We hope that you will join us and hear about the great work that they are doing. Also, you will get a brief survey about tonight's program, and when you do receive that, we ask you to please complete the survey. We love to hear from you, or you can message us through the Meetup platform. Again, our thanks to our guests. Really wonderful to have you with us tonight, and we so appreciate you for joining us. Any other points you wanted to mention more regarding social media?
Hi, everyone. Just to piggyback off of what Elaine said, I'll be posting, I'm going to put in the chat our LinkedIn group. If you want to join us there, we post where the presentations so you can view after if you weren't able to join, and then also all the information about upcoming events we have. So I will put that in the chat, and feel free to join us there as well.
And to learn more about Charity Navigator and the great work Tamsin and Stephen are doing, charitynavigator.org. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Good evening.